No, no, that's not possible. Adetola would never. Her voice broke mid-sentence, her entire body shaking. Mama Ade reached out to touch her shoulder, but Olashewa flinched. I did not believe it either, Mama Ade admitted, her voice heavy with guilt. But I had to warn you. My daughter, be strong. Be strong? How was she supposed to be strong when her entire world was crashing around her? That night, Olashewa sat by the door, waiting. Each passing second stretched into eternity. The air felt thick with betrayal, her heart pounding in erratic beats as she replayed Mama Ade's words over and over again. Had she been blind all this time? Had Adetola truly abandoned their love? Then, she heard the familiar sound of his footsteps approaching, slow and steady, like a man with no worries in the world. The door creaked open, and there he was, Adetola. His face was calm, his smile warm, like everything was normal, like he hadn't been the subject of cruel whispers, like he hadn't been accused of the ultimate betrayal, like her heart wasn't breaking into 1,000 pieces. Olashewa rose slowly, her body trembling, not just with anger, but with heartbreak, with disbelief, with something she couldn't even name. It was as though every emotion inside her was fighting for dominance, threatening to explode. Adetola, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the air like a blade, sharp and heavy with the weight of her pain. His smile faltered, the warmth in his eyes dimming just slightly. My love, what's wrong? He took a step closer, reaching for her, but she flinched, and his hand froze midair. That hesitation, that brief second of withdrawal, it hurt him. She saw it in his eyes, but she didn't care. Not tonight, not when her whole world was spinning. She stepped closer, her fists clenched at her sides, nails digging into her palms. Tell me it's a lie. Adetola's brow furrowed. Confusion flickered across his face, but it was brief, too brief. Tell you what is a lie? He asked, his voice measured, careful. Too careful. Olashewa's chest heaved, her breath unsteady. The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating. She could hear the faint chirping of crickets outside, the distant chatter of neighbors settling in for the night. But inside this room, inside this moment, it was just the two of them. Her, him, and the storm brewing between them. Her voice cracked, her vision blurred with unshed tears. The words felt like shards of glass in her throat, cutting her as she spoke. That you're with another woman. For the first time, she saw it, fear. It flashed across Adetola's face like lightning in a storm, there for only a second before he tried to hide it. But it was too late. His eyes widened, his shoulders tensed, and the warmth that had always been in his gaze flickered, replaced by something raw, something unsettling. What? His voice rose, a mix of shock and defense. Who told you that? Is it what the old woman was saying? In fact, you disappointed me for believing such words. Even though she is my mother, she is an outsider to us. Olashewa's breath caught. An outsider? The words barely made it past her lips, her voice thin, fragile, like a thread that could snap at any moment. She let out a bitter laugh, one that held no humor, only disbelief. Or what did I hear you say? She took a shaky step back, shaking her head. Your mother is not an outsider here, Adetola. Her voice was firmer now, steadier. She is the one who carried you in her womb. She is the one who raised you. And now, she is the one who has warned me. Or do you mean to say that she is lying? Adetola ran a hand over his face, frustration creeping into his features. Olashewa, you have to believe me. I have never. Just tell me the truth. She cut him off, her voice sharp, slicing through the air between them. Just tell me, Adetola. so that I will know where I stand. Since your mother has advised me to be strong, let me know what I must be strong for." The room pulsed with a heavy silence, thick and suffocating, as if the very walls were holding their breath. The oil lamp flickered in the corner, casting restless shadows across Adetola's face, making him look even more like a man caught between guilt and desperation. And in that moment, Olashewa knew, even before he could answer, even before he could say anything further to defend himself. She knew. It was not about what he would say, it was about what he hadn't said yet. About the fear she had seen, the hesitation, the weight in his posture. Her chest rose and fell in uneven breaths, her hands trembling at her sides. This was the man she had chosen over everything, over everyone. The man she had fought for, sacrificed for, loved without reservation. And now, she had to ask herself the one question she had never dared to consider. Had she made a mistake? Olashewa felt her knees weaken, and for a brief moment, she thought she might collapse under the weight of her own despair. A sharp pain twisted in her chest, making it difficult to breathe. She wanted to believe him. Oh, how she wanted to believe him. But the seed of doubt had already taken root in her heart, twisting and growing like a relentless vine, refusing to be ignored. It coiled around every beautiful memory they had shared, choking the joy out of them until all that remained was uncertainty and fear. Could it be true?
I hope you are enjoying the story. Please, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so that you will be notified anytime I upload new video. Now let's continue the story.
Was Adetola really hiding something from her? Her mind spun in chaotic loops, drowning in the whispers she had heard at the workplace. Those pitying murmurs from women who used to admire her strength but now only saw her as a cautionary tale. A woman who marries for love instead of security will suffer, one had said. See where it has led her. Then there were the disapproving glances from her parents. Each time she visited them, her mother's eyes would darken with disappointment, her father's silence like an invisible wound cutting deeper than any words could. 3 years and no child. 3 years and still struggling. And now, this? Mama Aid's warning played over and over in her head, her words a dagger piercing the last bit of hope she clung to. My daughter, be strong. Be strong for what? The walls of their tiny home, once filled with laughter and dreams, now felt like a suffocating prison. The wooden beams that had once seemed sturdy now loomed over her, pressing in from all sides. The bed where they had whispered sweet promises under the glow of the moon felt cold, empty. She stared at Adetola, searching his face for something, anything, that would prove them all wrong. But the longer she looked, the more she realized that she wasn't just fighting the rumors. She was fighting the part of her that had already started to believe them. Adetola took a desperate step forward, his face etched with raw pain. His hands trembled at his sides as if fighting the urge to reach for her. Olashewa, I swear to you, on my life, on my love for you, I have never betrayed you. I would never do that to you. His voice cracked, his breathing uneven. There was something in his eyes, a desperate plea, a silent scream that made her heart twist. But Olashewa could not meet his gaze. She turned her face away, her vision blurred by the flood of tears streaming down her cheeks. The man standing before her was the same man who had once held her close and whispered dreams of forever. The same man who had vowed that nothing, not time, not trials, not even fate, would ever come between them. Yet here they were, drowning in the spaces between truth and doubt. She shook her head slowly, her breath hitching. Then why Adetola? Her voice broke, fragile as glass, each syllable cutting into the space between them. Why are they saying it? Why would Mama Ade hear such a thing? Her voice trembled not with anger, but with exhaustion. Exhaustion from fighting, from hoping, from holding on to a love that now felt like sand slipping through her fingers. Adetola opened his mouth to respond, but she didn't give him a chance. "Have I not suffered enough?" The question escaped her lips in a whisper, but it carried the weight of years of silent battles, of buried fears, of unspoken prayers. Her fingers curled into the fabric of her wrapper, gripping tightly as though it could hold her together. "Must I also carry the shame of a husband who has abandoned me?" The words shattered the air between them like a fragile pot thrown against a stone floor. A silence followed, thick and suffocating, pressing against their chests with an unbearable weight. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in, the memories that once lived within them now distant ghosts. Adetola's lips parted, but no words came. What could he say? How could he erase the seed of doubt that had already taken root in her heart? Olashewa wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold together the shattered pieces of her heart. A heart that once beat only for him. A heart that now trembled under the fear of betrayal. Adetola took another step forward, his hands reaching out instinctively, but Olashewa flinched. Just slightly, just enough. And then she stepped back. That movement, that single heartbreaking step backward, sliced through him like a blade. His chest tightened, his breath hitched. It was small, but it spoke louder than any words. She didn't trust him. Not completely. Not anymore. Adetola swallowed hard, fighting the lump rising in his throat. His hands, which had once held her with certainty, now hung uselessly by his sides. The distance between them had never felt this vast, this impossible. "Olashewa, don't do this," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, fragile, trembling. "Please, don't let their words come between us." But hadn't they already? Hadn't the doubt already seeped into the cracks of their love, tainting the foundation they had built? Olashewa let out a slow, shaky breath and turned away from him. She pressed her fingers against her temples, willing herself to think, to breathe, to find a single thread of clarity in the tangled mess of emotions. But all she could hear was the echo of those whispers, the murmurs in the workplace, the hushed voices at the well, the silent, knowing glances from her family. And now, the weight of Mama Aid's words pressing down on her like an unseen burden. How had it come to this? She had fought for him. She had sacrificed for this love. She had walked away from comfort and privilege, from the security of her father's house, just to be by his side. And yet, here she stood, questioning the very man she had sworn to stand beside. Her heart ached, torn between love and fear. And somewhere deep inside her, asterisk asterisk in the quietest, most vulnerable part of her soul, asterisk asterisk a question she was too afraid to ask fully took form. What if they were right? What if she had been blind? What if she had been a fool all along? Adetola's chest tightened, his pulse roaring in his ears like a war drum. "Abandon you?" His voice cracked with raw disbelief. "Olashewa, how can you say that?" Without thinking, he reached for her hands, clutching them as if they were the only thing keeping him afloat in a raging storm. His grip trembled, not from anger, but from desperation, from fear. "I have fought for us, Olashewa." His voice wavered, thick with emotion. "I have stood against my own mother, against the world, just to be with you. I have endured their judgment, their mockery, their endless talks, because I chose you. I choose you every single day." His breathing was ragged, his eyes searching hers for something, anything, that told him she still believed in him. But Olashewa couldn't look at him.
I hope you are enjoying the story. Please, don't forget to like, subscribe, and and turn on the notification bell so that you will be notified anytime I upload new video. Now let's continue the story.
Her shoulders shook as silent sobs racked her body. She pressed her hands against her face, trying to muffle the sound, but it was useless. The dam had broken. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to erase the voices in her head, the cruel whispers that haunted her day and night. She wanted to close her eyes and go back to when loving him was simple, when his word was all she needed. But the weight of her pain was too much to bear. It clung to her like wet cloth, dragging her down, suffocating her, drowning her in a sea of doubt. Then why Adetola? Her voice was small, broken, fragile like a dying ember. Why do they speak as if they know something I don't? Why does it feel like I'm the only one in the dark? Her words sliced through the air, through him. Adetola's grip on her hands loosened, because he knew. He knew that no matter how many times he denied it, no matter how much he swore on his love for her, the seed of doubt had been planted. And doubt, once it takes root, does not let go easily. I don't know what to believe anymore. Olashewa's voice cracked as the storm inside her finally broke free. All I know is that I am tired, Adetola. I am tired of being laughed at, of being pitted, of feeling like a woman without worth. Her chest heaved with each ragged breath, her body trembling as though it could no longer carry the weight of her sorrow. How had it come to this? When had love turned into this endless ache? This battlefield where she was the only one left wounded. Her knees buckled, and before she could stop herself, she sank to the floor. A sob tore through her, raw and unrestrained. Adetola was beside her in an instant. He dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around her, holding her as if he could somehow shield her from the pain clawing at her soul. "You are my wife, my love, my life," he whispered brokenly, his voice thick with unshed tears. He held her close, pressing his forehead against hers, rocking her gently like a child in distress. "You are not worthless, Olashewa. You are everything to me." But how could she believe that when the world said otherwise? When every glance, every whisper, every knowing smirk from strangers told her that she was a fool, that she had thrown away her dignity for a love that may not have been real, that she was clinging to a man who had already let her go? She buried her face in his chest, inhaling the familiar scent of him, a scent that once brought her comfort, but now only made her question if she was the only one who still felt this deeply. "Then prove it, Adetola," she whispered against his shirt, her fingers clutching at the fabric. "Prove to me that I am not a fool for loving you. Because if she was wrong, if the whispers were right, if Adetola had indeed betrayed her, then she wasn't sure she would ever be able to piece herself back together again." Days turned into weeks, and Olashewa drifted further into a silence that frightened even her. She no longer participated in the usual workplace banter, no longer laughed at her colleagues' jokes, no longer had the strength to force a smile when they asked if she was okay. She wasn't okay. She barely went to church anymore. The place that once filled her with warmth and purpose now felt suffocating, its walls whispering back all the things she couldn't bear to hear. The pity in their eyes, the murmurs behind her back. It was too much. At home, she barely spoke. Even when Adetola tried to draw her out of the abyss she was slipping into, she only responded with nods or a few empty words. The silence between them stretched, growing heavier with each passing day, like a wall neither of them knew how to climb. The light in her eyes had dimmed. No, it had not just dimmed. It had been extinguished, replaced by a sorrow too deep, too heavy, too vast to name. Then, one night, Adetola stirred in his sleep, instinctively reaching for her. But his hand met nothing. His eyes flew open, and his heart pounded. Her side of the bed was empty. The sheets were still cool to the touch. Panic gripped him. He sat up, his mind racing. Where could she be? He scanned the dark room, then rushed out of bed, searching the small flat frantically. Olashewa! He called her name, his voice echoing through the empty spaces. The kitchen empty, the bathroom empty. He checked the front door. It was unlocked. His breath came in sharp, shallow gasps as he stepped outside. The night air was crisp, the silence unsettling. Then he saw her. She was sitting on the bare ground outside, her night wrapper loosely draped around her shivering frame. Her shoulders trembled, but not from the cold. Her eyes were lifted to the night sky, vacant, distant, lost in a world he could not reach. Silent tears glistened on her cheeks, trailing down like rivers of grief. Adetola's chest ached at the sight of her. This was not the woman he married. The woman he had loved so deeply was slipping away from him, and the terrifying part was he didn't know how to bring her back. Olashewa, Adetola whispered, kneeling beside her. His voice was soft, hesitant, as though he feared that even the smallest sound would shatter what remained of her fragile spirit. She did not turn to him, did not acknowledge his presence beyond the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Her gaze remained fixed on the vast, endless sky, her eyes hollow, empty. "Do you think God has forgotten me?" she asked suddenly, her voice distant, almost as if she were speaking to herself rather than to him. Adetola's heart clenched at the question. He had seen her strong. He had seen her radiant. He had seen her fight against the world with a fire that once burned so brightly within her. But now she was fading before his eyes. "Olashewa," he said again, his voice thick with emotion. He reached for her, his fingers brushing against her cold, trembling hand, but she did not move, did not respond. "I feel empty, Adetola," she murmured, her words barely audible. "Like there is nothing left inside me, like I have been poured out, drained of everything that made me who I was." Adetola swallowed hard, fighting the lump in his throat. She was slipping into a darkness that he did not know how to fight, into a sorrow so deep that it terrified him. His hands trembled as he cupped her face, forcing her to look at him. The sight of her, so fragile, so broken, sent a fresh wave of agony through him. "Then let me fill you," he pleaded, his voice raw with desperation. "Let me carry this pain with you. You don't have to bear it alone, Olashewa. You don't have to suffer in silence." Her lips quivered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. For a moment, he thought she would say something, that she would reach for him, that she would allow him to be her strength when hers had failed. But instead, she let out a shuddering breath and turned away again, her gaze once more lost in the darkness of the sky. And in that moment, Adetola feared that she was already too far gone for him to reach. But Olashewa only stared ahead, her eyes vacant, lost in a darkness he could not penetrate. Adetola felt something deep inside him crack. It was not just the pain of watching his wife slip away. It was the helplessness, the agonizing realization that he was losing her, not to another man, not to the cruel tongues that whispered behind her back, but to sorrow, to despair, to the unrelenting burden of a world that had never fully embraced her. And the worst part? There was nothing he could do to stop it. He could hold her. He could whisper reassurances. He could beg her to fight. But how do you save someone who has already stopped believing they are worth saving? The days stretched into weeks, and Olashewa drifted further. She moved like a shadow through their home, speaking only when spoken to, barely eating, barely sleeping. The light that once danced in her eyes, the laughter that once made their small flat feel like the grandest palace. It was all gone. And then, as though fate sought to test them further, Adetola's father died. The news hit like a violent storm, tearing through the fragile foundation of their already crumbling world. The responsibilities fell on Adetola like a mountain of stone, the weight of tradition pressing against his chest until he could barely breathe. As the first son, he was expected to take his place as the pillar of the family, to uphold the name his father left behind. But how could he uphold a name when he had no heir? The whispers that once plagued Olashewa now turned toward him. A man with no child is like a tree with no roots. Perhaps the gods are punishing him for choosing a barren woman. His father was a strong man, but Adetola? What legacy does he have to pass down? Adetola clenched his fists against the words, swallowing his anger, his pain. He had never cared for the expectations of others, but now, their voices echoed in his own mind, in his own heart, feeding the fear that had been lurking beneath the surface. Would his father have been disappointed in him? Would his family turn their backs on him now? And worst of all, was there truth in their words? Was his love for Olashewa strong enough to survive this? Or were they both drowning in a tide too strong to fight? One evening, as they sat in their dimly lit room, the silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken grief. The small oil lamp flickered weakly in the corner, casting shadows on the walls, shadows that seemed to mirror the growing distance between them. Olashewa hesitated before reaching for Adetola's hands. Her fingers were cold, trembling, yet laced with a quiet resolve. For the first time in weeks, she met his gaze, her eyes pools of sorrow and sacrifice. "My love," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, as though afraid that speaking too loudly would shatter what little remained of them. "I cannot watch you suffer any longer." Adetola stiffened, his tired eyes searching hers, a flicker of dread settling in his chest. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice hushed, cautious, as if he already feared the answer. Olashewa swallowed the lump rising in her throat. Every word she was about to speak felt like a dagger, cutting her from the inside out. "Take another wife." She forced the words out, though they tasted like ash in her mouth. "Give your family a child. Silence their insults. Let them know it is not your fault."
Thanks for watching today's story. I believe you enjoyed every bit of it all. Now I want you to do me one favor, subscribe to this channel, like and turn on the notification bell if you have not done so that whenever I release my next video, you will be notified immediately. See you soon.